So let's actually take a walk around and look at some of the things that the animals have done for us and for our land.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Dan, as we get over here, we're going to look at some of the technologies that we actually utilize to rotate our animals around the pasture. One of them is this electrified netting. It's a temporary fence product that allows us to take advantage of the growth patterns around our farm and to concentrate our animals in a smaller area for a shorter period of time without having to invest in a large quantity of permanent fencing. And over here we utilize some amount of permanent field fencing, which is woven wire with a single hot wire at the top that allows us to move our electrified netting around the pasture and still get power. What we're looking at right here is one of our small winter feeding areas that's next to our shelter and next to a frost-free water source. So this pasture held them for approximately 2 months throughout the winter. And you can already see they're back in here temporarily as we get ready to move them to a new location. But you can already see the green up that's happened. If you look across the road, all you'll see is the light brown haze. That's continuous CRP management. Not that it's not a good program, but it provides a large amount of thatch that actually slows down soil warming and prevents the large amount of new growth from sending up new shoots and putting down new roots, which is one of the ways that you can increase your soil's organic matter.
I see, yeah.
Organic matter above the soil doesn't feed the soil microorganisms, which means it doesn't increase the fertility, water holding capacity, and other things within the soil.
So having the animals on it to eat that, to graze the extra organic matter will will prevent the thatch from being laid down.
Yes, it does, to some extent. We shoot for, when we do an intensive grazing period, is to eat a third, stomp on a third, and manure and urine a third. So that allows the animals to get the best quality nutrition from the pasture, to return some of the organic matter in an uneaten state back to the soil surface, and their hoof action pushes it into the surface of the soil so that you get good soil contact with the thatch that you do leave, and that allows the soil microorganisms to start on it earlier than if your thatch is tall, brown, lignified, carbonaceous material that's not in contact with soil microorganisms. It just stands there and doesn't provide anything to the soil food web.
In the past, I've seen you grazing all different species of animals together. Are they each eating something different in the pasture, or are they is there a cycle of grazing that's going on?
There is. We practice interspecies grazing or multi-species grazing. It's also called pasture stacking by certain people. Each of the 3 types of animals that we predominantly graze, the cows, the sheep, and the goats, have a different baseline desire to eat things. Cattle are grazers. They eat predominantly tall grass. Sheep are grazers, but they don't mind a fair amount of browse or broadleaf forbs in their diet. And goats prefer to eat predominantly browse. That's woody shrubs or leaves off of trees, or they'll even strip the bark off of trees if they're in an area and they like it. So by putting them all together, we're able to utilize more of the resources that are growing on pasture. We can even graze an area that's overgrown with thatch or tree sprouts, perhaps even of an invasive or non-desirable species. And the goats will defoliate those, opening up the floor of the ground beneath it to sunlight, which will stimulate growth of herbaceous perennials, ironweed, goldenrod, which some people consider noxious weeds. Also eupatorium, plantain, yarrow, other broadleaf species, dandelion even, and those are things that the sheep prefer to eat. So it increases the available forage material for the sheep on the next grazing cycle. As long as you move the animals out before they destroy the trees, or if they've only, perhaps thinned out some of them, then you still produce the same above ground woody-based biomass leaves, and you have more on the ground, so the next time all the animals come through, there's more for all of them to eat. Also, when an animal crops off a single bite of grass, the root system below that plant sloughs off a portion of its root to bring it into balance, so that provides an immediate pulse of carbonaceous material and root material to the soil microorganisms for them to start breaking down. If you have ample water and good sunshine and keep the animals away from it after they initially eat it, That allows the roots to regenerate, the top growth to renew, and puts the plant back into a vegetative growth stage as opposed to a reproductive growth stage. So a stand of pasture grass that's cropped off with animals is continually growing at a high juvenile growth rate, as opposed to an area that's not grazed at all, grows to a certain physiological maturity, sends up a stalk of seeds, puts all of its energy into ripening seed, and then for the most part stops until its next growth cycle the next year. With animals, you can choose to graze that off at any point in that life cycle and restart it at the juvenile growth stage. That's how we're able to grow more biomass, hence more feed for our animals on less space than if we were to turn them out into a field and allow them to graze that area continually. Animals are kind of like children. They'll go back to the same thing that they like time after time and not eat the things that they perhaps don't like but that are still good for them. We never want to pin our animals to the point where they have to eat what's there, because if a plant species is perhaps not toxic but mildly stressing to the animal and that's all they have to eat, that's how you can sicken your livestock very quickly. But rotating them around in high density, they get very competitive. If we get a chance to move the animals into a new pasture, you'll actually see that they try to eat the bite of grass that the other animals are going for. And that provides us with the opportunity to get across an area very rapidly, because as those animals compete with one another in an area that there's sufficient food, it tends to utilize the material better, and since they have a higher intake, they tend to put on more weight gain in the same period of time.
And for the amount of land used, what would you say is the difference between the conventional methods of livestock production versus a more sustainable version? And I'm thinking about like the amount of meat that we can have in our diets.
Right.
You know, right now people have meat-intensive diets because industrial agriculture is doing it unsustainably, living off of fossil fuel. But what would you say is the more sustainable, realistic diet for the average American?
I would have to say that across the United States, we would have to lower our meat consumption per capita to be able to sustainably raise the meat. But I don't have a quantifiable number for that. I can say that with rotational grazing, our land can carry more animals through the entire year than with conventional grazing in this particular area in the humid Midwest with moderately ample rainfall, moderately acceptable soil quality. A conventional farmer needs 3 to 7 acres per cow or per animal unit equivalent. We can do the same amount of production with as little as 2 acres in our best pasture spaces and not more than 3 or 4 in our worst pasture spaces, which are improving with our management styles. So I feel that we could certainly meet our nutritional needs from animal products in the United States with the existing grazing land we have, particularly if we took out some of the land that's used for production of corn and soy that we wouldn't need if we moved to a sustainable pasture-based animal livestock system. But it would still result in a reduction in the per capita meat consumption in the United States, which could potentially help our health and longevity also.